today's session. My name is Gloria Madenge, and we are co-facilitating this session with Michael Sharp from SDD, and Ian Cope, who will also introduce himself, who is our consultant that is supporting us on this project. So we would like to begin this session by providing you with a bit of a background about this project, and to also provide you with a recap of what happened during the last webinar series. And then we will have a presentation from Fiji, which relates to the topic being discussed. And then finally, we'll have a roundtable session about your perspectives on the topic of the day. So just a second for my presentation to load. So the title of the project is Utilization of Administrative Databases in Census Programs of Pacific Island Countries. And when we talk about administrative databases, in another way, we are also referring to registers, which are also often the sources of administrative data. So that's how the three topics are linking up. And this is a project that SPC has commissioned and in collaboration, of course, with Pacific countries, and in line with the 10-year Pacific Statistics Strategy, which commits us to provide support to Pacific Island countries in the development of statistical systems. So we are focusing on this project with an aim of raising awareness of the opportunities and the prerequisites for the use of registers and administrative data in providing census outputs. And this project basically, in the awareness raising space, we are trying to learn from other countries that have been using registers and administrative data for this sort of work. And that's why, as you would have seen in the agenda, we've tried to draw on other countries in other parts of the world to speak into the sessions. So we have two phases of this project, and the first phase is that of awareness raising, which we are conducting through a set of webinars on this topic. And alongside that, we will also have some papers written about the topic, which outlines the key methodological issues that will be discussed through this series. So the second phase of this work will be to work with a Pacific Island country or Pacific Island countries that will be interested in the practical aspects of this project. That is, countries that would like to go into possibly piloting this piece of work, and of course also trialing it against planned census work and so forth. So these discussions will be held within this series, and including more extensively at the last webinar, which is the 6th webinar. So when we talk about registers and administrative data and the prevailing context, especially the COVID-19 pandemic, we see this being possibly the future of collection of data, not just for the region, but globally. As you would have noticed from UNSD's recent survey, quite a number of countries have had to put a pause to their censuses or to reorganize themselves to be able to either postpone or reorganize themselves in the way that they are undertaking their censuses. And countries that are using administrative data seem to be to the lower extent, affected to a small extent in terms of the pandemic. And of course, what has been happening over the years is that admin data sources have been growing in strength, and I will speak to like the civil registration databases. Over the years, we've been working with Pacific countries in improving CRVS systems, and we see progress in this area, and I'm sure there are other registers that have been witnessing progress over the years. So there's been maturity happening over time. The other point that makes us feel that it will be a prime time to consider these databases is that in the Pacific, we start to see quite a number of countries legislating the utilization of legislating national ID systems and the utilization of unique identifiers for the population. And this provides another example to be able to link people's records, of course, if the law applies. So these are all opportunities that we are seeing in this regard, and we think that there is potential to have these maximized. And so this is what this project is about. It's about learning from other countries that have done this kind of work and seeing whether these approaches could be possible for the region. So I will ask Ian to pick up from here. And as I mentioned, Ian is working with us closely on this project, and he is our lead consultant. So thank you, Ian. Please take the floor.
Hi, Ian Cope here from I used to work in the UK Office for National Statistics. How do I take control? So I've just got a few slides here to recap very briefly the main points from the first webinar, just to make, for some people may have not been there, or just to refresh your memory if you were. So the UN recognises 5 alternative ways of carrying out censuses. The sort of full field enumeration, so-called traditional census, which is what the Pacific Island countries adopt, and people either interview based, as it's largely done in the Pacific Island countries, or self-completion on paper or online. France only has a rolling census, and there are various combined methodologies, mixing registers and admin data, or registers plus survey data, and then kind of all the way through to a fully registered based approach. A colleague from the UN who spoke last time shared this slide that shows the majority of countries. This is for the 2020 global round of censuses. The UN recently carried out a survey a bit earlier this year. Most countries are carrying out traditional censuses still. But there's an increasing use over the last 2 or 3 censuses in the use of registers, either full registers or combined with a full field enumeration or sample surveys. And the use of registers is most common in Europe. Looking at breaking that down by region, shows again that the traditional census is the most popular means, and that's certainly true in Oceania, although there were relatively few countries that responded to the survey. And you can see here that the fully registered based census approach is the most common within Europe, and then there's again growing use of various types of combined censuses. So just the kind of key points from that surveys, and the UN Economic Commission for Europe also carried out a survey of its members. The variety of methods for carrying out census. As I said, the traditional censuses still predominate, increasing use of registers in Europe and a bit in Asia. You can use admin data to supplement a traditional census. You don't have to go from a traditional census straight to a registered based census, and there are advantages from doing that. Geocoding of census data is becoming increasingly important, so the coordinates of the addresses and the properties, and then obviously the use of electronic data collection and admin records is transforming the way that censuses are carried out. UN colleagues also shared some information about the COVID-19 crisis. So, I mean, as Gloria has alluded to, the countries that have a registered-based censuses are largely unaffected by COVID-19, whereas those countries that are running a traditional census have had to maybe reschedule or repurpose some of their activities, and particularly the full field enumeration, if there are restrictions on face-to-face contact. But the COVID-19 crisis has also provided an opportunity to make more use of administrative data, and some activities have been done very quickly to meet the crisis by certain NSOs. And our colleagues from the UN Economic Commission for Europe gave some examples from Ireland and Mexico, where they had very quickly built on existing relationships, existing data supplies to produce new analyses and particularly using dashboards to make the information readily available to politicians, the public and non-statisticians. That was quite an important message. And then again, this point about geocoding data to be able to link through the geo-reference the property, the people in the property, location of businesses and jobs. And then my final slide, recapping, was an example from the UNECE of Georgia, who had made use of free and open source tools. So some of this activity using administrative data doesn't have to be expensive and relying on large databases and proprietary software. So those were briefly some of the kind of key points that come out of the first webinar, and I'll stop there. Do you want to open that up for questions, Gloria?
Yeah, we will do that. I think I would like to welcome any questions, but of course, just to underline that what we are seeing is an increased use of registers in different parts of the world, messaging that it takes time to organize yourself, but it's a journey that possibly our countries would want to consider to begin on, and it can be done gradually in a phased approach. And the role of registers and addresses, the role of addresses and georeferencing of data is critical in terms of building up towards this initiative. So thank you, Ian, for that presentation. Colleagues, I would like to welcome you to raise any questions in regards to that presentation. I did share the copies of the slides, and you'll have a chance to go in depth into each of the sessions. But for now, I would like to hear from you whether you have any thoughts about any of those issues. And you can do so by raising your hand or just picking up or writing any comment that you may have in the chat box.
Morning, everyone. This is Mike here. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I'm from the Census and Survey Technical Support Team of Statistics for Development Division, and we've got a huge interest in this space for a number of reasons, and I'll focus on the main reason, and this was highlighted as a risk to censuses in the Pacific by the Pacific's Statistics Methods Board, where censuses are becoming more and more complicated. We have respondent fatigue. I mean, there's a huge amount of face-to-face interviews happening in the Pacific region, and census is one of many. We also have an issue with technology development. So in the Pacific region, we've been moving from paper-based surveys to using tablets to collect data. And in the cases of, say, New Zealand and Australia, for example, they've moved to web-based surveys, web-based censuses, I should say. Now, technology, I see, presents a huge opportunity. It presents an opportunity for more efficient data collection, for implementation of verification and validation systems to improve data quality. But the risk of technology, and we saw from the first session we had a technology breakdown, but the risk with technology is that if it doesn't work or if it doesn't meet respondent needs, then it poses a risk to census failure. And sticking with the case of New Zealand and their experience in conducting census using a web-based format, they had a low response rate. I think they had about an 86% response rate in New Zealand. And fortunately, they were able to salvage this through the use of administrative data systems or population registers. And so Yes, the functioning and the role that that administrative databases play in census and is on de-risking the potential for census failure. So it reduces the risk of census failure, which could be through a number of reasons, including failure of technology. So we're really excited by that, and we note that the census plays a huge role in providing basic fundamental development data. So it's the denominator for all population-based indicators. The census directly reports to 15, I think, of the 131 sustainable development indicators of the Pacific. So it's a really important source of data, and it's important that we get this right. And we can get it right by conducting a really good census on its own, but we can bolster the good census on its own by having complementary administrative data sources. Or the potential future is to move away from census and move towards standalone administrative-based population registers, and then the socioeconomic data that we produce from census can be complemented through socioeconomic surveys. So look, there's a good future here. I think in terms of like the future of statistical collections in the Pacific, we are indeed going to have to rely more on administrative-based sources because the data demands are just so huge. We can't keep running survey after survey after survey. We're going to have to start to get smarter and become more efficient in the way we use administrative data sources. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for those remarks. And I just want to read out some comments by Samoa here, of course, to you, Ian, and Mike. You're welcome to, and everyone on the floor, you're welcome to discuss through this. So our colleagues say data integration is not that simple unless there's a common or standard way of combining data from different systems. Is there any specific administrative data that you refer to integrate with the census data? And then thirdly, how can we ensure that the principles of official statistics are shared across administrative data from different organizations? We need 100% CRVS to start using register-based data. That is perfectly true. I couldn't agree more, especially to your last point, Samoa. And I'll just give a few remarks and then welcome Mike and Ian and any other participant that would want to contribute to join the discussion. So when you talk about the first point, that data integration is not that simple, for sure, unless there's a standard and common standard way of combining data from different administrative data systems. I think this is a very, very important point, and that is where the role of coordination of the national statistical system and the role of NSDSs is very critical. If I would speak from the CRVS side of things, and I think administrative data in general, we see that they are collected for administrative purposes that is not necessarily statistical, and sometimes the design of the registration forms in themselves can be very qualitative and non-statistics oriented, and this is where we see that the role of NSOs would really be critical in supporting that function of ensuring that at the data collection place that there is a standard way in which that data is collected, which can be consumed by the National Statistical Office for statistics purposes. Would you like to comment, Mike, on any of the other points? Ian, you're welcome, and anyone else?
Can I chip in first? So those are very good points, and we will be covering those in the future webinars. That's why we've got a range of speakers talking with a different experience that they've got. Data integration absolutely is not simple, and the countries that have done this, one of the reasons it takes time. You also have to you have to build relationships with the owners of the administrative data or the registration systems. Feeding back on the quality of the data is actually important because the Statistics Office, the NSO, will have a different perspective on quality often than the owner of the data themselves, and they might be surprised at the feedback they get and welcome it actually normally. And then you'll need to build systems to bring together the data as relevant for you. Now, it's always easier if you have a population register with unique identifiers that are used commonly between the different registers, and you will hear at the next webinar, that's the situation in the Netherlands, which makes integration much easier. But we'll also be hearing from Statistics New Zealand and from the Office for National Statistics later on in the series of webinar 5, where that isn't the case, and they've still been able to do some effective data integration using identifiers such as name, date of birth, and location. So those are points that will absolutely be covered in this webinar series. I can't remember, what was the second point that Summer made, Gloria? Is there any specific admin data? So countries that start on this, and all the Nordic countries didn't get here overnight. They took about 30 years, and the same true in the Netherlands, and we'll hear about that in future webinars. They typically start with 3 key registers: a population register if they have one, an address register, and a business register. Those are kind of critical base registers to identify the population, where people live and where they work. And then, depending on what data sources are available within the country, then they add in further ones. Education is often near the top of the list as well. So this will vary from country to country according to what registers or administrative data that you have. And as we'll hear in later webinars, the countries that have adopted this approach have kind of gradually added in these data sources as they have reached reasonable quality. And then finally, on your point about the principles of official statistics, I mean, yes, that's important, but I think the countries that do registered-based censuses would say that you need to kind of think about this maybe slightly differently. So, for instance, issues around quality. We all know that censuses are not perfect. We have non-response, we have item non-response when people don't answer questions. And the same is true of admin data and registers. It's just a different way of thinking about quality. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, and often when you're using administrative data, you can produce results every year. So there's a quality gain perhaps from having more regular data. So you have to think about quality. You certainly have to think about quality and the principles of official statistics, but it's a different kind of having to think about it. So it's not exactly the same as you would apply to census data. But again, I hope that we'll be hearing from some of the other countries later in the webinar series, and they'll be able to share with you their own approaches and experience. And I'll definitely encourage you to ask them questions.
Thank you so much for those points, and I just want to add on to the point on the fundamental principles of official statistics and why we are having different audiences in this call is that in many cases we see that those principles are known to statisticians, but those principles might not be known to register owners. And I think part of why we are having this conversation and inviting civil registrars and other register owners into this conversation is that it is important that that awareness from the NSO and the principles required is shared across, so that there is that understanding of the standards that will be required at that level. I also want to really agree with Samoa on the need of 100% CRVS data, because like Ian mentioned, one of the 3 base registers to begin with would be a population register, and you cannot have a good population register if you have a dysfunctional civil registration system. So it will be important to have universal CRVS system that will help you into achieving a population register. And we are also seeing national identification systems being very critical in supporting that record linkage work and unique identification of records across databases. That's all from my side. And now, do we have anyone from the floor who would like to share more? Okay, with that then, I think I will invite Fiji to share their experience. Then we'll have another opportunity for discussion at the end of Fiji's presentation. So Va, please take the floor.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Vaviseva again, presenting on behalf of Fiji Bureau of Statistics. We just like to share some of the experience that of Fiji regarding the admin data that we have in Fiji. So some of you may not know about Fiji, so these are just a few of the informations we have about Fiji, that it lies in the heart of the Pacific Ocean. We have 330 islands and covers 1.3 million square kilometers of the South Pacific. And currently our capital is Suva, and according to our last census in 2017, our population count in Fiji is 884,887. Thank you. So that will be the content of the presentation. These are the few subtopics that were sent by Gloria as to discuss on my presentation. So firstly, for Fiji, the census taken every 10 years, and the last census was taken in 2017. So the methods of enumeration for us here in Fiji, the latest census 2017, it was interview based but on KEPI, that is using of tablet, and self-enumeration, it was on paper, and this applies only to the non-private dwellings, the NPDs, and this includes the prisons, hotels, hospitals, etc. And we do use census administrative data to assist in our census census information, and we access this admin data, individual person information, only on occurrence and registered births and deaths, that is occurrence from Ministry of Health and registered births and deaths from registration office. This is for us to get our population estimates for non-census years. And we extract data only upon request. And there's only two sources, that is, as I mentioned earlier, Ministry of Health and Registrar Office. Next, these are the registers we have in Fiji. We have the business registers. They do their registration on Civil Registration Office, Employment Register for the Ministry of Employment, Education Register, that is for the Ministry of Education, the Births, Deaths and Marriages, the Civil Registration Office. This is the VKB. It's a Volni Kawambula from Ministry of Tauke Affairs. This is one of the norm for us Itaukes to register in, maybe for our inheritance and land inheritance. Land Transport Authorities. These are registered of all licensed vehicles by type. We have also Marine Authority. They register vessels and including boats, fiberglass boats. Energy Fiji Limited for the electrification of households and companies. Water Authority, which registered all metered water supply to all households. We also have FIRCA, or Fiji Revenue and Customs Services, which register all tax for persons and companies. Also financial banks, Fiji National Provident Fund. It's a mandatory savings that we have in Fiji. And also Fiji High Commissions. These are mostly register the students or high tertiary education. Moving on, the specific registers, as discussions been going on population register. For us in Fiji, different stakeholders, they're doing their own register for registration for their own purposes. For example, you can see elections, they do their own register in order to be on the, to vote. The Fiji, the FIRCA, as I mentioned. And also we have, for Bureau of Statistics, we rely only on Register General, that is the births, deaths, and marriages. But if a foreigner becomes citizens, they are not registered, only if they register through the BDM system. So we can say that for Fiji, we currently don't have a population register. For addressing system in Fiji, there is no specific address register. So in other words, I can say different stakeholders have their own addressing system. For example, municipalities, example, land departments, housing authorities, they have their own lot numbers. And there's no specific or standardized addressing system for us in Fiji. Thank you. Moving on. There's discussion going on about unique, the national identification. For us, we don't have it at the moment, and there is plans going on, and it's been implemented to be implemented in Fiji. I believe Gloria already knew about that. There is discussion going on in our CRVS in Fiji about the national ID, which will be really helpful for us in Fiji in order to achieve 100% registration. I think moving on, some of the challenges we're facing right now for Fiji is data sharing and accessing of data between key stakeholders. This is the key stakeholders mostly for us at Bureau of Stats is the Ministry of Health, where we get our occurrence data, and registration data from our register office. And this is due to late registration of vital events at several offices. Most parents don't really take it seriously to register their child, but I can say it's improving for us here in Fiji due to incentives that are in place by the government. And also geographical location, that is the remoteness of household in the maritime islands. As I said, there are 330 islands in Fiji, and it will be difficult for parents to come and register their child, or if there's a death occur at an island, it will be really, it will take them time for the guardians or families to come and register the deaths. And for our NSDS, or National Statistics Development Strategic, we're in the process of finalization of Fiji NSDS. So I think that's all from Fiji. And if there's any question, Vinaka.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Va. That was an excellent presentation, and it's nice to see that you have already started on some work to take a stock take of what registers you have, and even utilizing some for some of your in-between census population counts. Do we have any questions on the floor from participants for Fiji about their presentation and administrative data situation? And it will also be useful to hear from your experiences about the registers that you have, and are you making use of any of those in your censuses, for instance, in your population counts? And also it will be nice to hear about the status of your national ID systems. So anyone who would want to take the floor, you're welcome.
Thank you, Gloria. This is Kele from Tokelau. I think this subject is actually taking me back to 2004 when I raised with the Tokelau Parliament to develop a population register for Tokelau, and for us to slowly move away from census and use this population register for such a small population of 1,500, 5,600, the last census. And a few weeks ago, I raised this issue again with other government departments and I even asked our IT manager to start looking at developing a system where we can register all people on Tokelau at the same time. How we can revive the immigration cards, because at the moment we don't have the kind of system to monitor and to collect information of people moving in and out of Tokelau. So I thought having such a population register, to develop such a register at this point, together with whatever information we can get, administrative data we can get from people moving in and out of Tokelau, we can create a small register, and also we can link with other information that or data we have at the moment from the previous census. For example, information or data related to housing, and also how we can link with other surveys that we are about to undertake very soon. So I think I'm not asking any question, but I just want to raise this. I think I understand there are challenges, but I was just a bit optimistic at how we could use this opportunity to have information, to create a population register and have information ready and available. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Keller. I think that's a very good background and insight. And as you've highlighted, certainly there are challenges along the way, but with the Pacific, I think that we have a big advantage in the sense that our countries are small, and maybe the bureaucracies that other countries have gone through in making progress in this regard would be to a lesser extent for the region. So some of those steps could be leapfrogged. Really thank you for those insights. And we will be producing some documents on population registers and how to go about those. So I think those are resources that might come in useful through this work. We have a question from Ian. Ian, would you like to take the floor?
Okay, fine. I wrote it down. I wasn't sure whether you wanted to do it. So that was an excellent presentation from Fiji. Thank you very much. It was interesting to hear about the possibility of developing an ID system within your country. This seems like an ideal opportunity to safeguard access and use of the associated register by and for statistics. Is that something that you're actively engaged with?
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, we have a statistical, it's a statistical act that we use, which has, it states the confidentiality of information that we collect. We do access those register, but it's available within the country.
So I asked two questions. I think you might be addressing the second one, which was around, do you have legislation that gives you access to those registers? I know in the UK, it was only 3 years ago that there was legislation in place that gave the Office for National Statistics a presumed right of access to admin data held by government. Prior to that, it was different legislation for different purposes or different arrangements, etc. It was very complicated. So yeah, that's a quite recent change even in the UK. So does your Statistics Act give you the right of access or not?
Belum Ian. This is Millie. Yeah. Just to add on to what Vadiseva has mentioned, we have each of our ministries. We have our own legislation, which our legislation only covers like within our department, and with the other ministries they have their own legislation too as well. However, we have memorandums of understanding which can be signed between the two ministries or the two departments sharing the information, which we will be able to access the other ministries' information or data.
Okay.
However, our legislation doesn't allow us to. We don't have that full authority to have access. Just like that, we have to have a memorandum of understanding between the two ministries.
Yeah. Even when you've got statistical legislation in place that allows such data flows, you always need to have some arrangement and a memorandum of understanding to describe it, etc. So that sounds quite positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Meli and Va, for those insights. We have some questions from the government statistician of Samoa, and I'd like to give the floor to Samoa to raise the questions. I'll just read out the questions just in case our counterparts from Samoa are not able to engage verbally right now. So the question to Fiji: what is the percentage of coverage of your birth and death registration? And Tokelau, what identification system are you using to link your data? So I think let's go for Fiji first, and then Tokelau will come in.
I believe at the moment we have 80% completeness. As per our last report. Thank you.
Is that for both birth and death, Meli, or is it only for death?
I believe for both. Yeah. I believe for both.
I think it is around that range. So there's if I would recall from the last vital statistics report which we developed in Fiji, death registration interestingly happened to have a higher level of coverage as compared to birth registration, but it is within that range of 70 to 80% for both vital events.
Yes, that's correct.
And then
right now we're working on achieving that 100% completeness.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meli. Thank you. And Tokelau, what identification are you using to link your administrative data?
Thank you, Ali Momo, for the question. But at the moment, we haven't done anything. So no, I can't really respond to the question because we haven't done anything at the moment.
Mm-hmm. But I think there is scope to use, including, it might not be a national ID system, but I think there are other forms of identification that governments' experiences have shown that you can piggyback on, maybe the passport numbering system or a unique numbering system in other databases. So I think that's a conversation in itself, a big conversation, but thank you so much for that insight. Would you have something else to add? Okay. I'll just read out another comment from Samoa to say that Samoa is already embarking on a national ID project to provide everyone with a unique ID with funding support from the World Bank. It's a huge project, and to date they have had a draft strategy in place, and the legislation is in process. They say that they hope to finalize both by the end of this year, and of course they send their apologies because they don't have a microphone. So yeah, that's the status of things in Samoa, and we are starting to see quite a few countries starting to look into national ID systems. And the big point that we try to emphasize here through the civil registration program is that it is important that the national ID, that the foundation of the national ID system is the civil registration system. So it's important to ensure that your births and deaths are being registered properly and on time within the CRVS system. Then that is the way you can maintain a functional national ID system, because what we see in some places is that if you don't have a functional CRVS system, then you will register, you'll have people entering into your national ID program, but you're not able to remove them when they die. So what happens is that you continue to maintain a list of people who probably are no longer alive or are no longer within the territory and so forth. So that linkage and interoperability between the CRVS system and the national ID system is really, really critical. So do we have any other comments from the floor? Okay, I'll just, looking at the time, we have just a few minutes towards the end of this session. So I just want to tell you that we have a web page where we are uploading all the materials related to this work. And you will see it in my previous email to you. And on that web page, we have the presentations that will be made. We will also be putting up the papers that will be produced from this work. At the moment, that web page also includes a list of definitions, because we realize that this topic might raise quite a number of terms that are new to some of us. So we have a list of key definitions over there that you can refer to, and we will continue to upload it with material as appropriate. So we will have our next webinar, which will happen on the 12th of August. For that webinar, we have invited Statistics Netherlands to share their experience about how they went about getting to the stage where they are. And then we will also have Paris 21 that will speak to the importance of national strategies for the development of statistics in supporting this administrative data and registers work. And then lastly, our consultant Ian will share a synthesis of lessons learned in other parts of the world on the adoption of registers and administrative data in census statistics. So we'd like to really encourage you to be there and to actively participate, and specifically to ask targeted questions that can help us move towards implementation. So yeah, we really welcome you. We will send a reminder email on the eve of the event, and we look forward to having you there. We are also likely to change the platform that we are using from MS Teams to Zoom, because we realize that this platform is causing us a bit of challenge, and I understand that Zoom is a better platform. So we will share out that information on email. Besides this, on our side, we really would want to hope that this project will be useful to you, and that is to government statistics offices and to register owners, and that we will be able to realize some very practical outputs from this piece of work. And with these remarks from our side here, I would like to say thank you very much for joining and participating in this session, and we look forward to having you again on the 12th of August. Michael, do you have something else to add? Yeah. Ian, would you have something else to add?
The only thing I would say was it's been great to hear from some of the Pacific Island countries, and to have your questions and contributions. We were both conscious that we didn't really have many questions or contributions at the first one, partly because of the timing and technical issues. So it's been great to actually hear from people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Do we have any comments from the floor, from countries?
Sorry, Gloria, are we about to finish?
Yes, we are just welcoming any. Yes.
Sorry, I just have a last question. Is there any other country in the Pacific that have already introduced the national ID, or are we in the same place?
Kiribati and Tonga do have a national ID system, and as you've heard, Samoa is in the process of having that in place. We did a study last year that took a stock of the countries that have national ID systems. So that's a piece of information that I will try to compile and share with you on email and with everybody for your information based on what we compiled. And thank you. That's an interesting question.
Sorry, Gloria. Just another question.
Sorry, Melly. Vanuatu doesn't have a mic, but they say that they have started using their national ID since 2018. Okay, thank you, Melly. Please take the floor.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to ask if there's any other countries in the Pacific that has any country in the world that has their full admin data working, which they don't use census anymore?
Yes. Ian, would you like to answer that question?
Can I just clarify, was there any countries in the world that don't have a census that just rely on admin data? Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a number. There's well, as you saw from that earlier slide, there were at least 12 in Europe, so that includes the Netherlands. So they largely use registers data. They use some information from the landforce survey. Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they all use registered-based data censuses, and they haven't been. Denmark hasn't run a sort of traditional census since 1981. Then there are other countries that are moving in that direction. Spain hopes to move there in 2021. And Austria is also a fully registered-based system. They switched from a traditional census in 2001 to a fully registered-based census in 2011. And I'll explain some of their journey in a future webinar. So yeah, there are countries. It's the early ones, the Nordic countries. Sweden, Finland, Denmark, etc. It took them about 30 years, but that's partly because technology was much more complicated and slow back then. Austria was able to make that change in only 10 years. But there are various things that have to be in place to make that possible. And again, I'll be bringing some of those key points out in future webinars.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
All right, then. I think we will call it a day from this side, and we really thank you for your active participation. And until next time on the 12th, we will be in touch with you. Thank you very much for joining the session.